You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Locked On Lakers for Tuesday. Brian Kamenetzky and Andy Kamenetzky. Andy, it's game 2 night.
Yeah.
Tonight. Are we at must-win territory already? Like, are we there yet? Or
I mean, look, you and I have talked about this before, Brian. Every playoff game is a must-win. Like, there's no such thing as a playoff game that you can just crap away. Like, you're not necessarily done if you lose any particular game other than the elimination game, but they're all must-win.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's no bleeping around.
Yeah, I would classify this in sure would be nice. Like, you can find out what happens if you don't win game 2.
How about this?
I wouldn't want to.
It's a better win game. You better win.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So we'll talk about some of the adjustments that the Lakers may or may not be looking to make into game 2, Andy. Adjustments, Andy. That's the buzzword between games always in the NBA playoffs. Talk about adjustments. And so that's what we're going to do. A big one that people are talking about is
can't spell a lot of adjustments without Andre.
That's right. And so we'll get into whether or not the Lakers ought to find some playing time for Marc Gasol and whether we think that will happen in the second segment. And some interesting numbers around betting lines and all kinds of fun things that actually get to sort of the respect level that the Lakers are getting even after that game 1 loss. We'll talk about that before we're done. Do want to let you know that today's show brought to you by Rock Auto. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com and tell them that Locked On sent you. So Andy, one of my favorite things about the playoffs is the challenge that coaches face, particularly when they lose, in trying to decide, do we really need to fundamentally change something, whether it's, personnel, lineups, something, whatever it might be, or do we need to hone in on the things that we were trying to do in that game 1, game 2, whatever it is, and just execute them better. And the Lakers are in that position right now after losing game 1, 99-90. Vogel was asked about this at practice on Monday and basically said they focus first on doing the stuff that they are trying to do and just doing it better. I'm okay with that.
Well, a lot of this depends on what you're defining as the things that they know they do well, do it better. Like, for example, the Lakers were terrible in transition defense against the Suns, and it was really magnified by the fact that the Suns aren't even a team that looked to run to begin with. Like, they are a very methodical, slow-paced team, and I think they recognized, very much to their surprise, I know I was surprised watching the game, hey, we can run against these guys. It's out of character, but let's not look a gift horse in the mouth. Let's take some easy baskets. And that's the type of thing that, KCP, I thought, hit the nail pretty well on the head during Monday's practice or media session after practice, when he said just we weren't engaged, and like we need to just be more prepared. Phoenix was the more prepared team than us, and I think he probably means X's and O's, but I think more than anything,
I think
he's talking about mentally.
I took it to mean both. I meant mentally and physically. Yes. I think they were just not prepared. And one weird and I think a little wrinkle that I don't think they were necessarily prepared for, and I think Phoenix got more juice out of it, was the crowd. I think that was they have not played in front of a lot of that. Certainly nothing that resembles a playoff crowd like that. 1,000, 1,500. Like, they've been getting.
I can tell you the last time they had that atmosphere, Brian. I can tell you the pinpoint that weekend when they beat the Bucks and the Clippers.
Yes,
which was a massive weekend. It was right before the stoppage, because then they.
But for people who don't know, you're talking about last year.
Yes, I'm talking about in early 2020, like early March 2020. They had a weekend where they beat both the Clippers and the Bucks. It was a massive statement weekend. You and I were inside Staples for both of those games. It felt like a playoff atmosphere. Like, that was a really, really charged setting. There has been nothing close to that since.
I feel like that was something that gave Phoenix a little bit of extra energy. I mean, look, there's a reason home court advantage is a thing in the NBA. I don't think it matters that much to the Lakers, but you have to be prepared for it. And
well, in particular too, Brian, with Phoenix, they haven't been there in so long. Like they as a team and the crowd as fans were incredibly geeked for this moment.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like this was big. The Suns, I don't believe, have been to the playoffs since they faced the Lakers, I want to say in the Western Conference Finals in 2010.
I believe that's correct.
I don't think they've been there since.
Yeah, but I mean, I will say this: like the Lakers got off to a decent start. I mean, it wasn't like Phoenix rolled out to a 25-point lead, and they had to, LA had to claw its way back, and the Lakers were fine at the beginning of the game. But it's we have spent all season talking about how the offense is shaky, often. And, you look at how the shooters are shaky often. They shot 27% from 3-point range. But, this number, and Alex Regula from SB Nation, Silver Screen and Roll broke it down. 17 of the Lakers' 26 threes on Sunday were classified as, quote, wide open. Like there are rules about this. And so they were wide open. 7 more were just regular open. So 24 of 26 then are good to great shots from 3-point range. They hit 25% of them, 6 of 24. If you're the coaching staff, do you look at that and say, we need to try something different? Or do you look at it and say, if we can get 26 or 24 of our 26 3-pointers are either regular open or super wide open, you do that again, don't you? Like, you don't go away from that.
That is by definition you executing your offense. Like
right.
you do it to engineer those type of looks. Like going back to what KCP said about, just the lack of urgency, needing to be more mentally prepared. I thought the Lakers were slow in this game to react to a lot of different things, whether you're talking about slow on the court, getting out rebounded by a pretty bad rebounding team in Phoenix. We talked about in Monday's show how they were slow to a lot of 50-50 balls, but also like in-game adjustment or even awareness, like how slow they were and frankly didn't do anything really to recognize Chris Paul is compromised. Let's capitalize on this. Like Rob Mahoney from The Ringer wrote a really good piece. I tweeted out at Cam Brothers about just how Chris Paul wasn't a detriment for the Suns in this game because the Lakers didn't make him one. Like they didn't make him become a truly left-handed player. This is a great stat from this piece. You know how many turnovers Chris Paul had after the collision that caused his shoulder problem? 1. And as sloppy and compromised as his handle looked during this game, he only turned the ball over 1 time. Like that's inexcusable by the Lakers.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's funny. Like there are times when, and LeBron, you've seen this effect with LeBron, you've seen this effect with Kobe. There's certain players that are so ingrained with like the things you need to worry about when they're like, and I think to unprogram, we have to attack Chris Paul.
Yeah.
Your brain as a basketball player doesn't do that because attacking Chris Paul when he's on a good team usually is a terrible idea.
Yeah, it sets you up for failure.
Always find your vulnerability.
Yeah.
And make you pay for it. But you have to be able to jump on those things like that. It generally seems like a terrible idea, but yeah, it's little stuff like that, and defensively, obviously there were possessions where they didn't do their, my favorite possession of the game to illustrate how the Lakers were not always on the same page was the one where Ayton was so wide open under the basket. He didn't realize that nobody was near him. He just assumed that somebody, for the love of God, must be guarding me. And so he turned around and he passed the ball out to the 3-point line instead of dunking it because he was too wide open. Like, so bleep like that happened. But overall, the Lakers, I don't think they lost. I mean, Phoenix scored 99 points, and it's a little misleading because, they weren't running up and down the floor. You mentioned it. They're not a fast team. They don't have 1,000 possessions, But like, it's not like they shot 57% or anything like that, you know. And as the game went on, the Lakers had plenty of good moments. So it's not like, I don't think they have to scrap the entire thing defensively either. When I went back and watched some of it again today, on Tuesday, and then you look at some of the numbers, it really is, from an execution standpoint for me, a fine line between do different things that may even go outside what you want to do, and do what you do, but do it better. Don't hit 25% of your shots, hit 35. Make your free throws. you know,
I mean, there's
like that.
There's no point to getting 17 free throws in the first half to Phoenix's 0 if you're going to shoot them that crappy. I mean, there's
the Lakers shot
little payoff.
The Lakers shot 19 of them before Phoenix took 1.
Yeah.
It's just it's so stuff like that. If you're a nervous Lakers fan, you look at some of these things. Anthony Davis, given exactly the same, I don't care how, and we'll get to the center thing in like literally like a minute here. But whether you think that Andre Drummond is the worst thing that ever happened to him or not, if you gave Davis the same 16 shots Tuesday night in game 2, he's probably not going to hit 5 of them. Yeah. He'd probably hit 7 or 8. You know,
that being said, I hope he chooses some different shots.
I completely do too. All right, so there we'll get. You know, I know maybe you had some specific things you want to see in game 2, but the other big thing, obviously, Andy, that they can adjust, that's an easy adjustment, is personnel. And when you talk about personnel, really what we're talking about is center.
Again, you can't spell adjustments without a lot of Andre.
Right. Not all of it, but a lot of it.
But enough. Certainly enough. So
how much playing time? How much playing time does Marc Gasol get? How much playing time do you think Andre Drummond is expecting Marc Gasol to get? Some interesting comments Monday at practice, which we'll talk about next.
Locked on Lakers brought to you by Lucy. Lucy Nicotine is a company founded by Caltech scientists, former smokers looking for a better, cleaner nicotine alternative. Researched and developed for 3 years to be made for people, not patients. They have nicotine gum with 4 milligrams of nicotine that comes in 3 flavors: wintergreen, cinnamon, pomegranate, which sounds very interesting. They also have a lozenge with 4 milligrams of nicotine in 3 flavors: cherry ice, citrus, mint. Convenient, discreet. Products can be enjoyed anywhere, on flights, at work, on the go, even in the gym. It's 2021, people. Get rid of your cigarettes, unplug the vape, throw out your dip. This is the real deal. A subscription to Lucy comes directly to your door each month. It's simple. You don't have to leave your house. Lucy lozenges and gums are also FSA, HSA eligible, so you can spend your pre-tax dollars on them. Locked On NBA Network listeners, go to lucy.co, use the promo code Locked On NBA, get 20% off on all products for your first order, including gum and lozenges. That's lucy.co. Use the promo code Locked On NBA at the checkout. Also, I do have to make a disclaimer, a warning. This product contains nicotine derived from tobacco. Nicotine is an addictive chemical. Lucy.co, and make sure to use the promo code Locked On NBA.
Locked On Lakers also brought to you by Rock Auto. Andy, with the ever-increasing number of makes and models out there, it's now impossible to stock all the parts you need in a traditional chain storefront. And, why go in there and endure all the questions that you have to answer? Like, is it an EX? Is it an LX? Is it a G5026 or a G4743? I made all those things up, but they could be real. I don't know. And that's why it's intimidating. And then you got to wait while the guy orders the parts on his computer, and then they choose the brand that the warehouse carries, and not necessarily the best one for you. Andy, you've got a computer, and if you have a computer, you have access to rockauto.com at home. You even have it in your pocket if you have a smartphone, and I know you do. Chain stores, they have different price tiers for professional mechanics and do-it-yourselfers. Rockauto.com's prices are the same for everybody, and they're reliably low, 20, 30, even 50% off. Lower than chain stores or a new car dealership. They have everything from engine control modules and brake parts to tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. So go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right in Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box? So they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Okay, Andre Drummond.
It's become an obligatory thing.
Yeah. He sounded Monday at practice, after practice, speaking to the media, Andy, like a guy who is fully prepared for a lineup change to be coming. That might, I'm not saying, Vogel didn't tip his hat. I'm not sure they've told anybody about anything at practice, but Drummond sounded like a guy who is very aware that this could be coming.
Well, if not a lineup change, like in terms of him losing his starting spot to Marc Gasol, it sounded like Drummond was expecting some rotational changes and things that are going to affect his minutes and how often he plays. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because this game one, Andre Drummond was not the solution, but he wasn't the problem either.
No,
like he was 5 of 7 from the field for 12 points. He had 9 rebounds, 7 were offensive. Depending on which metric you use or which site you go to, whatever, for all the bitching about Andre Drummond's effect on the offense, and we have brought up some issues like everybody else.
And I don't care if Andre Drummond plays. It's not like we have like stock in Drummond's IPO.
Take it a step further. You and I have covered the Lakers for, I believe it's now 15 years, something like that. Over time, you develop relationships with players. You develop affections with certain ones that, you like more than others. I mean, we've talked before about, how much we think of Pau Gasol, Lamar Odom, Ronny Turiaf, a bunch of different guys. We've never met Andre Drummond because this season is being done virtually, socially distanced. I have asked him one question on a Zoom, I believe during his introductory press conference. Other than that, I'm not sure the man has ever seen my face because I usually have my camera off because my child is here.
Oh my God. The amount of multitasking that I've been doing all season long. I'm in the car. I'm picking kids up. I'm doing this. I got the baby over here. Like I am doing things. I don't mind it. I'm very productive. So I like the setup. But yeah, I mean, neither one of us neither one of us have even a small emotional attachment to Andre Drummond.
Right, exactly. So I just want to make that clear from the beginning. But his offensive rating was either second or third on the team, depending on where you go. But his overall presence has made things complicated. Andre Drummond has said as much, talked about how they are figuring out this lineup with him and LeBron and Anthony Davis literally in real time as you go, which Ryan is not ideal during the playoffs.
Well, and this gets to the thing about part of the answer about the Drummond thing. And Craig Smith Basketball, who does the Lakers Exceptionalism podcast, has a bunch of great numbers about the amount that AD shoots at the rim when Drummond is there compared to other centers, and it is, but like all kinds of really good numbers. Go check it out. Go check out their podcast. Check out his Twitter feed. There's a lot of great information in there. And there's no question, AD is more of a jump shooter when he plays with Drummond. Now, I don't know if that's all because of Drummond or because some of the way that AD has played throughout the year. Whatever. He shoots more jump shots when he plays with Drummond than with other guys. All this stuff. Part of the reason, though, that it makes some sense to go back to, if you wanted to swap out Gasol for Drummond, is exactly what Drummond was talking about in that quote. I think in that big lineup, we didn't have enough time to work on it, so it's something we're kind of just throwing out there with little time and little experience. That's a quote. Playoffs are not a time to be making up it as you go along, as you say, Andy. So if you play Marc Gasol those 19 minutes that went to Drummond, you're not making it up. They've done that. They have much more muscle memory of Gasol, aside from the arguments about which guy's better fit, and Marc Gasol plays higher on the floor and all that stuff, and defensively is still quite good. It makes sense to me. For that reason, most of all that Drummond is pointing out, it's just easier. Sometimes, like, take the path of least resistance sometimes.
Yeah, the playoffs are hard enough as it is. This is something I've actually asked Frank Vogel about, like, I want to say a couple weeks ago, just the idea of, where do you draw the line between the upside that Frank Vogel clearly sees in, like, the perfect world version of Drummond and Davis together. And to be fair, there have been times where it actually has looked good, versus just the idea of familiarity, simplicity, and you are up against a clock. And, this was before the playoffs even began. And Vogel understood what I was asking, but he talked up yet again what he sees as those potential benefits from the two of them being together. Vogel likes size as a coach. We know this. We also know he will go away from it, but all things being equal, it's what he prefers from either an attack, an approach, whatever you want to call it. I do think, though, we're going to be seeing Marc Gasol in game 2, regardless. And frankly, if we don't, I'm going to start questioning what Frank Vogel's doing, because the resistance that we've seen in the last week and a half to Gasol automatically being in the rotation, particularly when he's played well, is something that I don't always understand, if I'm being honest.
Yeah. I mean, which game was it that he came off the bench and was like a plus 63 in 7 minutes?
I mean, you and I both thought that Gasol was more likely to be a rotation mainstay than Montrezl Harrell. I mean, we both thought that was going to be the case.
Too. It's it doesn't necessarily, and Trez had some of this is so tightly related to when you play guys and against which guys. Trez was great against Phoenix's smaller second unit guys. He got throttled whenever Ayton was on the floor because they found that matchup and made it and exploited it. Even when Trez had another big next to him, it still didn't work. And if you're going to play Drummond and AD together, it needs to always be, I think, with LeBron. I don't think you can split up LeBron, put AD and Drummond out together and expect that to work as well with the sort of the secondary playmakers that the Lakers have there. I don't think that's going to work. And I don't think you can put Trez on the floor, so it's mixing and matching these things in a way that maybe I think more trouble than it's worth to quite possibly just go Drummond and Gasol, or Gasol and a lot more AD at the 5, and just expect AD to play better. I mean, that's part of it. Pete Zayas pointed out, the Lakers were even when anybody else other than AD was playing the 5, and they were minus, I think, 14 with AD at the 5.
Yeah, that was something Frank Vogel actually. He was asked about AD at the 5 in game 1,
and he made a point of saying that was not our best lineup.
Right,
it has been their best lineup,
and that's important because
in game 1.
Well, but it's also important to point out, and as much as I do think ultimately, over time, it would be their best lineup, they haven't done it a lot this year, period.
No.
Between the people that they've had and they've chosen to play and Davis's absence, they have not run AD much at the 5 at all. And even though it's a lot of the same people from last year, it's not all of them. Right. There is time that you would want, for guys like Schroeder or Wes Matthews or anybody that's new to be doing that with AD, at center, and they haven't done it much this year.
No, and quite some of it's just, it comes down to what we were talking about on Monday's show. If AD plays like he did on Sunday, it doesn't matter if he plays the 4 or the 5. It doesn't. It doesn't matter. Certain things, he could play like that next to Gasol, and the Lakers still aren't going to get what they need, where they need to go. The Lakers don't. There are certain things Gasol can get exploited with, in terms of how Phoenix can move him around and put him in space and all that kind of, but he is a very smart defender. And I don't think the Lakers lose, and to have his facilitating on the floor for 15 minutes, I think would, 20 minutes, whatever it would be, I think would be a massive benefit. And I agree with you. I'd be surprised if they don't go to it in game 2.
Well, here's the other thing too. Before we shift gears, there's that school of thought that, Andre Drummond was brought in to be, not the focal point that he's been with Detroit and Cleveland, but, an important role player on this team. And if, say, you take him out of the rotation or drastically reduce his minutes, you're going to lose him potentially when you might need him moving forward. I would like to think that Frank Vogel can communicate to Andre Drummond, look at some of these other teams coming up. If we end up against Denver, for example, it is impossible for you not to be playing in that series. Denver's too big, even with their backups. You're going to be using him at some point. There could be matchups against the Clippers where you could potentially use Drummond. Drummond's been around long enough, I would like to think, and Frank Vogel has, we know, been good enough at communicating this stuff, that you should be able to reduce his minutes in the opening round series without it becoming some catastrophe.
Well, the 19 he played in game one were I think the second lowest that he's played as a Laker.
Right.
And so, and as we pointed out, Drummond, and you could tell by his comments on Monday, Drummond is not going to make an issue out of it because he's a guy who wants to get another job after this one.
Yes.
And so I don't care. First of all, I don't mean it to be just cynical. Like he probably isn't the kind of person who's going to say, I'm going to put myself above this whole effort that all of these people are doing to try to repeat as champions of the NBA. My playing time matters more. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. But even if I didn't want to give him the benefit of the doubt, he's still not going to do it because he's not stupid.
Well, let's just say he is stupid and is going to do it. It's too easy a problem to solve. You don't play him.
Just don't play him.
Right. You don't play him. And the likelihood of him being on the
team
team
next year. Put him in street clothes and tell him to stay home.
Right. The likelihood of him being on the team next year is low under the best of circumstances because of CBA rules. So, it's not an issue. It's not a problem.
No, I agree. Charles Barkley said some interesting stuff about the Lakers that after their game one loss. And I know people like to give Charles some flack over things that he says that aren't so smart sometimes. I think this one might be spot on. We'll tell you about it next.
Locked On Lakers brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline, the fastest, easiest way to bet on all your sports action. Baseball season's in full swing. You can track all the action at BetOnline. This week, as always, lots of sports action on the go. We're going to be talking a little bit about lines, I think, coming up. Lakers, after losing game one, giving up a point and a half, according to the folks at BetOnline for game two. So I guess they're feeling saucy in the same way some Laker fans may be. Get all the latest news, odds, info on your sporting needs, including MLB, NBA, NHL, UFC, MMA. Before the next pitch, head over to BetOnline on your laptop, mobile device. Check out all the great sporting news, sign-up bonuses, contest information. Don't sit on the sidelines anymore. This is your chance to get into the game as teams prep for their run to the playoffs. Head to the website, use your mobile device, sign up today. Receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Promo code LOCKEDON. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts.
Okay, Andy, you mentioned it. The Lakers are going into Tuesday's game, giving up a point and a half. On the road, which is usually worth, I think, what do they say, 3 points in the NBA is generally what that is. And so this to me is interesting because you always wonder, is this a sign of Phoenix being dismissed? Is this a sign of respect for the Lakers? Or is this a sign that Vegas thinks that people are dumb, aren't really paying attention, and know that casual fans will just look at it and be like, oh, that's the group with LeBron and they're the Lakers, so I'm going to put my money there. And Lakers fans will put their money on LeBron, and they're all over the damn place. Or is this appropriate? It was a very interesting line to me. The fact that the Lakers are giving up points to me, I thought was really interesting.
Well, it could also be indicative of one more thing. We don't know Chris Paul's health. It could be.
Monty Williams said he's feeling it's not as sore as it was after.
He's not even on the injury report. I'm just saying it could be indicative of not knowing the version of Chris Paul that you're going to get in game two.
It could be. The respect factor is, I think, interesting as well, because Charles Barkley, after TNT and the pre and post game show and all that, said that nobody is scared of the Lakers right now. He said that after game one. I agree with him. I'm not saying that the Lakers aren't respected, but I do think they had a thing last year going into the bubble where teams, I'm not saying they didn't think they could beat them, but I think it required a lot more talking yourself into it. It required a little bit more delusion, perhaps, than this. LeBron's hurt. Nothing about them had any kind of continuity. They feel gettable to me this year in a way that they didn't last year. And I think that is a real thing that other teams feel as well.
Well, I would say that Barkley is half correct.
Mm-hmm.
I think he is wrong that nobody is afraid of the Lakers, because we saw as teams were jockeying for position and what seed they would be, there was at least one team that clearly wanted to avoid the Lakers. I'm not going to say their name, but it rhymes with slippers. And they've got a really bizarre looking duck mascot or condor or whatever the hell that is.
It's Condor.
It's Condor.
And it's really stupid.
Yes, it is. They clearly wanted no part of the Lakers. So I think Barkley is wrong if he's implying that teams would be looking forward to playing the Lakers, or they would be cool with playing the Lakers. I think that would be taking it too far. Where I think Barkley is correct, though, is that right now nobody is intimidated by playing the Lakers. And I think it's with good reason, because you don't know exactly the health of LeBron and AD, and this team has had no continuity over the last few months. And despite the fact that they, were on a reasonably good, winning clip before the playoffs began, they weren't dominating teams.
No.
And, they had to get a LeBron shot for the ages to get out of the play-in, and they crapped the bed in game 1 against Phoenix. So I think that part Barkley's right.
And honestly, what matters right now is, are the Suns frightened, afraid at all, or at all intimidated by the Lakers? And game 1 seemed to indicate no. And these are hard things to quantify. Like, the importance of something like this is hard to quantify, but it matters. Like, we've all played enough sports to know that, you go into most games, you can feel like, okay, if this happens, but when you're not as good, and when you need to get a little bit lucky, and when things start going the wrong way, that if you're not as good and the other team's got like a healthy LeBron and a healthy AD, I mean, you can pretend that you're going to be able to come back, but by this point, who your team is, and how good you are. And whether or not you're going to be able to come back on a fully functioning Lakers team, and no team last year could do it. And I don't think deep down in their heart of hearts, I think most of the teams the Lakers played last year probably didn't fully believe that they were better. Like, that they, that they should win, could win, maybe could, but not should. I think a lot of that's gone. And I think and I don't know if that makes the Lakers 10% more vulnerable, 15%, 5%, or whatever, but it's not nothing.
Well, I mean, here's the thing, though. You can build that back. I mean, if the Lakers look like the first half version of themselves, or something that resembles their form in the bubble when they won that championship, you can build that back, because I can promise you, if the Lakers look like that version of themselves, that intimidation factor will come back.
At the very least, all the stuff that we've been talking about for the last couple of days will completely disappear, and everything will be fine.
Right. Well, but it's not, the point being, these things are fluid. Like, you can look more invincible as things go along. You can look more vulnerable even as you advance in a series. Like, all of these things can happen, and that's what makes the playoff stakes like so great. And that's what makes the playoffs so much fun to watch.
And again, if you are a Lakers fan, to circle back to what we started with, if you're a Lakers fan looking for things to get to game 2, and you want this adjustment or that adjustment or whatever it might be, some of the adjustments are simply look for the Lakers to get back, kind of regress to the mean. LeBron and AD were 11 of 29 in game 1. That's probably going to get better. They're probably going to be better than 11 of 29. The Lakers shot 60% from the free throw line. That should get better. Maybe not as much as we would like, because they're not good at that, but that's going to get a little bit better. Like, there's a lot of natural improvement in that game 1 that you can look at. Whereas, DeAndre Ayton's probably not going to go 10 for 11 in game 2, and Devin Booker shot 50%. Like, he might be about the same, probably not going to be that much better. So, I mean, there are reasons to be confident, even as bad as the Lakers were. in game one. Do want to let you know we're going to have a lot of really fun YouTube exclusive content that will be going up really up with this one on the Locked On Lakers YouTube channel. So please make sure you're subscribing to that. Send us some emails, KamenetzkyBrothers@gmail.com or at Twitter @CamBrothers, and we will see everybody with Game 2 reaction on Wednesday.